Alaska is often thought of as a land of icy wilderness, breathtaking landscapes, and quiet remoteness. But in August 2025, this American frontier state found itself at the very center of global attention. At Joint Base Elmendorf, Richardson in Anchorage, U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin came face to face in a high-stakes summit aimed at resolving the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian War. For a few hours, the eyes of the world turned not to Washington, D.C. or Moscow, but to Alaska. The meeting carried heavy symbolism. Alaska, once part of Russia before being sold to the United States in 1867, suddenly became the site of one of the most significant diplomatic encounters of the decade. The images were powerful: Putin stepping off his jet under a military flyover of U.S. Air Force fighter jets and a B-2 stealth bomber, Trump arriving with his signature motorcade, nicknamed the Beast. Red carpets were rolled out, honor guards stood at attention, and the world's media broadcast every second. But as grand as the pageantry appeared, the outcome told a different story. No ceasefire was agreed upon, no breakthrough was reached. Instead, the summit left the world wondering, what does Alaska's moment in the diplomatic spotlight really mean for global politics? To truly understand the significance of a 2025 summit being held in Alaska, one must go back in history. Alaska was once Russian territory, sold to the United States in 1867 for $7.2 million, a deal often ridiculed at the time as Seward's folly. Today, that purchase is seen as one of the smartest geopolitical moves in U.S. history. The irony of Putin arriving on former Russian soil to negotiate with the U.S. president was not lost on observers. For both symbolism and practicality, Alaska was a striking choice. Geographically, it sits between the two nations, only a short flight from the Russian Far East and a strategic American outpost in the Arctic. Politically, it carried weight. Holding talks in Washington might have been seen as the U.S. demanding home advantage, while Moscow would have been unthinkable. Alaska was the neutral ground, though firmly under the stars and stripes. Beyond history, Alaska also represents the shifting global focus toward the Arctic. Melting ice caps, new shipping routes, and resource competition make the region increasingly vital. Thus, the summit wasn't only about Ukraine, it was about showing the world that Alaska, once thought of as America's remote frontier, is now frontline in global diplomacy. By bringing world leaders here, the U.S. signaled both its historical ownership and its modern strategic importance. The summit itself was a masterclass in contrasts. On the one hand, the pageantry was undeniable. Putin was welcomed with military honours that included a U.S. Air Force fighter jet flyover and even a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, a clear display of American power. He was chauffeured in the Beast, the presidential limousine usually reserved for American leaders, a gesture that caught international media by surprise. Trump and Putin walked side by side down a red carpet, photographers capturing what looked like a moment of thaw in icy relations. Yet behind closed doors, the meeting lasted less than 3 hours, and when the leaders emerged, no major agreements had been reached. The press briefing was short, with Trump giving an unusually brief 3.5-minute speech, and no questions were allowed. Analysts quickly concluded that Putin had outmaneuvered Trump diplomatically. Russia walked away having gained the appearance of parity with the US on American soil, while Trump left without the ceasefire he had hoped to secure as a political victory. For Ukraine, the lack of progress was disappointing for the world. It was a reminder that photo ops don't always translate into policy breakthroughs. The symbolism of the summit overshadowed its substance, raising questions about whether the choice of Alaska as a stage was meant more for spectacle than for solutions. The world's reaction to the Alaska summit was mixed, but all eyes were watching. In Europe, NATO allies expressed concern that no progress had been made toward ending the Russo-Ukrainian War. For them, the summit underscored the difficulty of negotiating with Moscow and raised doubts about Washington's strategy. In Kiev, disappointment was palpable. Ukrainian officials had hoped that the high-profile meeting would use at least a framework for ceasefire talks, but instead they were left with more uncertainty. In Russia, state media portrayed Putin as a strong leader standing on equal footing with the United States on what used to be Russian territory, spinning the optics as a symbolic victory. Within the US, reactions were polarized. Supporters of Trump praised him for attempting diplomacy, while critics accused him of giving Putin an unnecessary platform. Social media was abuzz with hashtags like Alaska Summit and a Putin in America trending globally. Analysts pointed out that while no agreements had been made, the summit still carried weight because it reminded the world of the unresolved conflict and highlighted the fragility of U.S. Russia relations. For Alaska itself, the event was unprecedented. Locals in Anchorage found their city suddenly flooded with journalists, security details, and international attention. For many Alaskans, it was a surreal reminder that the remote state could, for a moment, be the epicenter of global geopolitics. One of the most interesting outcomes of the summit is the spotlight it placed on Alaska's broader strategic role. For years, the Arctic has been seen as the next geopolitical frontier. With climate change opening up new shipping lanes, untapped oil and gas reserves becoming accessible, and increased military activity from Russia and China, the Arctic is no longer a frozen wasteland, it's a contested arena. Alaska, sitting at the doorstep of the Arctic and hosting critical U.S. military installations, is central to this emerging power struggle. The 2025 summit reinforced Alaska's position as more than just America's scenic wilderness. It is a symbol of American sovereignty in the Arctic, a launchpad for both diplomacy and deterrence. The presence of Putin and Trump in Anchorage was not just about Ukraine, it was a reminder to the world that the US intends to protect its Arctic interests and keep rivals in check. For Alaskans, this could mean more investment in infrastructure, military presence, and economic opportunities tied to the Arctic. But it also means their home state will increasingly be a flashpoint in global rivalries. The summit may not have ended the Russo-Ukrainian War, but it made one thing clear: Alaska is no longer on the periphery of global politics, it is at the center of it. The 2025 U.S. Russia summit in Alaska will be remembered less for its outcomes and more for its symbolism. It brought the leaders of two powerful nations to a place loaded with history and strategic importance. While no ceasefire was achieved and no agreements were signed, the event itself told a story of Russia facing America on soil that was once its own, of Trump seeking a diplomatic win but leaving empty-handed, and of Alaska revealing itself as more than just a state on the edge of the map. For the world, it was a reminder of how fragile peace remains in Eastern Europe and how tense US-Russia relations continue to be. For Alaska, it was a rare moment in the spotlight, a chance for its people and its land to be recognized as globally significant. Going forward, this summit will be studied as an example of how diplomacy often unfolds in spectacle, in symbolism, and in the complex dance of perception versus reality. The world may have moved on, but Alaska's role has been etched into the diplomatic memory of 2025, proving that sometimes the place of a meeting is as important as what is said inside the room.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, it really helps the channel grow. Got thoughts, questions or ideas? Drop them in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. And if you think someone else would find this interesting, don't forget to share it with them. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on new content. Thanks again for being here. See you in the next one.